Alright YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII, and today we are discussing Crisis Core Reunion once again, because we randomly got another interview, because we obviously had the info dump on the 25th anniversary, and like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, we got all those random like website interviews that came out, and then just like 2 days ago, we got another interview with Kitase with like a Chinese website, I believe it is, and he just talks about Rebirth and also Crisis Core Reunion. They also happen to be video interviews, which is pretty cool, a little bit different from the usual write-ups on websites, but that also means we are reliant on translators in this case. But to be perfectly fair, we're kind of always relying on translators, or at least them translating the initial Japanese version of the interviews, because they're usually quite different from what the English websites put out. Now, with this particular interview, it's for the Chinese press release of Crisis Core Reunion and also FF7 Rebirth. I think on the Rebirth side of things, there's not really anything to talk about. It's kind of the shit we've already heard of the last couple weeks or so. I think for the most part, that's kind of the same when it comes to the Crisis Core stuff. But there's one particular translation that's kind of making the rounds, where it talks about the potential of whether or not there is or isn't new stuff. And I gotta mention this because how could I not? But whenever I clicked on this website to go look at these interviews and kind of look around, because I've never even heard of the website, there's randomly like 4 of my fucking videos uploaded here. Not just like links to my videos like on YouTube, like they're straight up just uploaded on this website. I thought that was kind of strange. So when it comes to this particular translation that we're going to look at, we're going to check out TurquoiseHammer's translation first. For one, it was the first one that I'd seen, but also his was actually out like a full day before Audrey's. But we're also going to look at hers. They're relatively the same. They're pretty much the exact same, more or less. Just worded slightly differently. So I want to read them both so that we don't just focus on one translation. So the translation says, as for Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion scenario, the story is fundamentally the same as that of the original Crisis Core. Well, I say unchanged, but those who've seen Final Fantasy VII Remake or the trailer for Rebirth may get the sense that something's sort of different here. With that difference, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion fills a position in the continuity of Final Fantasy VII Remake project. Therefore, in that respect, I hope that players will enjoy Zack's story in this game as well as its discrepancy from what we see in Remake. So the thing that stands out right away is the very first line of the translation, where he talks about the scenario for Crisis Core Reunion and how the story will be fundamentally the same. Like, he's not saying that it's going to be the exact same, which is kind of what we heard in other interviews, which is why this one's kind of worth discussing and talking about. Because in the other interviews that we got over like the last like week or so, or whatever it was, people they were kind of just saying that it was going to be the same story, like nothing was going to be changed at all. It's kind of the implication we're getting from those interviews. But with this one, him saying that it's fundamentally the same, kind of leaves freedom and room for there to be some aspects that are different, which is kind of what we're all thinking anyways. Because if the Crisis Core Reunion story was the exact same as the regular Crisis Core, the one that we got on PSP back in like 2007, you would just say that. You would say the story is the same. Nothing's changed at all. But to say it's fundamentally the same implies that some things are different. Though he then follows that up with how, even if they say that it is relatively unchanged, that there are some differences if you played Remake and you also watched the Rebirth trailer. And that's how it kind of ties into the Remake project. But then at the end of the translation, he says that he hopes you can enjoy Zack's story in this game as well as its discrepancy from Remake. Its differences from Remake, which would imply the original Crisis Core ending. Because in order for there to be any sort of differences between Crisis Core Reunion and Final Fantasy VII Remake, it'd have to involve Zack's final stand, right? That's like the big thing. That's all we even see in Remake anyways, is Zack's final stand. Episode Intermission gave us obviously the church scene, but that's a scene that doesn't exist anywhere outside of Episode Intermission. So again, in order for these two games to have any sort of difference, Zack would have to die instead of live, right? The thing is, man, as soon as Crisis Core Reunion was revealed, there were people on Twitter like the exact same day they were like, it's going to have a new ending that ties it into Remake. And I've been saying since then, I've also seen Max say this and some other content creators out there say this too, that like it has to have the same ending. Like it just has to. That's the point. You got to see that moment. But also, if it's not the original ending, then it doesn't make sense in the Remake context. You have to understand that it's a different fucking ending. That it's a different fate for that character. That's the whole point. That being said, of course, I am still of the belief that there is going to be new stuff in the game. I just don't know what that could be. They completely remade the game. Like, all the assets. Every aspect of the game has been changed from the original PSP version, so they could add new stuff to the world. We've talked about this before. They could simply do, I don't know, stamp posters. We talked about that before, right? Like, if there's stamp posters around the world within Crisis Core Reunion, what that stamp logo is matters, because if it's the Beagle logo, then we know we're in the quote-unquote remake timeline, remake universe, whatever. But if we're going around the world of Crisis Core Reunion and it's this Terrier stamp logo, then it's like, okay, that's confirmation of a different timeline. This is definitely a different world. That's just an idea, that's just a suggestion. I'm not even somebody that necessarily believes in multiple timelines within the story, but that's a possibility. Assume that that is the case, because some of us don't think there's multiple timelines, but there absolutely could be. That could be the story they're trying to tell. There could also be, like we talked about before, a bonus ending, a secret ending. Maybe you got to do some shit in game to unlock it. There could simply be a post-credit scene that gives us some sort of update on the remake shit. Like, there's some things they could do. I just don't know what they're going to do. But I do think there is going to be new shit in the game. Hard to say what that is. But hopping back to the translation, the fact that Kitase says there are discrepancies between Crisis Core Reunion and what we see in FF7 Remake means Zack has to die. That's pretty much confirmation of that now. So now we'll read over Audrey's 2 really quickly. The story of Crisis Core FF7 Reunion will basically not change from the original game. However, even if we say that, there might be some who played Remake or watched the Rebirth trailer and felt that something was off. As such, you can consider Crisis Core FF7 Reunion as part of the FF7R project. With that in mind, we hope you can enjoy Zack's story along with the strange feeling that was brought forth from FF7R. So like I said previously, their translations are relatively the same, right? Hers says that the story's basically not changed. TurquoiseHammer says that it's fundamentally the same. Those are basically the same goddamn sentence. The middle part talking about something being kind of off, or TurquoiseHammer's translation saying that something's a bit different here. Like, those are, again, relatively the same translations. It's the last part that's kind of the big difference between these two, in my opinion. Because hers just talks about there being like a strange feeling when it came to FF7 Remake versus TurquoiseHammer's translation that straight up says that there's differences. There's discrepancies between Remake and what we're going to get in Crisis Core Reunion. And assume that they're both technically correct translations, TurquoiseHammer's is just way better. It's just way more in-depth, it's longer, it's way more informative, it's not as ambiguous. Like, there's just more information with their translations, which I think is why they're kind of making a name for themselves and have been for a while now on Twitter, like, doing translations. They just have the better translations, it seems like. And, like, I'm not trying to hate on Audrey by any means, right? I don't even know whose is more accurate. I don't speak Japanese, whatever the case. There's a reason I read both translations on the off chance that maybe TurquoiseHammer's is less accurate and hers is more accurate. I don't know. But I see TurquoiseHammer all the time on the feed, and they're constantly translating like the Ultimanias and shit that have never been translated. People take their translations as gospel these days, pretty much. So I feel like they're the more accurate one, at least these days. Now, putting these translations aside, like, they wouldn't have to change anything when it comes to Crisis Core, and it would still fit with the remake story, because you get that there's a difference. Like, if the Crisis Core story in Reunion plays out 100% the exact same, there's not a single aspect of the game that's changed, it still makes sense in the remake context. Because of us defeating the Whispers, it altered and changed the timeline, Zack survived. Like, that all still makes sense. They don't have to change anything at all in Crisis Core. But maybe they will. But my dudes, I think that's going to be pretty much the video, so of course I want to pass it out to you guys. For one, when it comes to these translations, if you have any sort of grasp or knowledge of the Japanese language, can you maybe watch the video? Have you watched the video? Can you tell me which one of them would maybe be more accurate? Because their translations, again, are like 99% the same. It's really just that last sentence that's the kind of difference between these two translations, because I feel like one's giving me a lot more information than the other, and I just don't know whose is more accurate. But in terms of the information that we got from these translations, do you think it is also confirmation that the story's going to be pretty much the same? Like, Zack has to die at the end of Crisis Core Reunion, but then the wording of basically not changed, fundamentally the same. Do you think that's also confirmation that there's going to be some new shit? Leave your thoughts and more in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't new today. More Final Fantasy 7 Crisis Core Reunion. I got that wrong again. It's Crisis Core Final Fantasy 7 Reunion. That's how you're supposed to say it, David. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, #DavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.